It's not look at me, I'm superior. It's please don't let me disappear. Please tell me I matter to a group. Please tell me I matter to you. I think it's so human. I once had a dear, dear friend, like an incredible friend, a lifelong forever friend, like, you're going to read the eulogy at my funeral, that kind of friend. And here's the truth. Our friendship ended because of a fight about, will you believe this? It was about fame. Fame, his desire for fame and my lack of empathy for that, for his value. And the pain that surrounds this unique and very complicated and thoroughly misunderstood value, fame. Hi, I'm Suzy Welch. I'm a professor of management practice at NYU Stern School of Business. I'm the author of a book called Becoming You, which is a methodology that helps you live a life of design. And it's just a book about how amazing and daunting life can be and how important it is to never give up on life or yourself. We're in the middle of a long, long series about each and every value that a person can hold. There's 16 of them. They each are along a continuum. So we're looking at each value in turn. And on today's podcast, our focus is on this value of fame, or as we call it, luminance in the Becoming You methodology. And we call it luminance because no one ever wants to admit out loud that they want fame. It's like considered kind of icky or vulgar to want fame, all right? And so to help people talk about themselves honestly, we've given them an assist, basically, by referring to fame as luminance, which does not carry the same kind of stigma with it. Because we do not judge in Becoming Universe. It is the no judgment zone. Your values are your values. And if you're not hurting anyone, they are yours to live if you have the courage and the capacity and the ability. So here is the agenda for today's very special values deep dive pod. Here's what's ahead. We're going to start with that agonizing story about my lost friend, which I still am so sorry about. And I'm going to try not to cry when I tell it because it taught me so much. It really did. Revisiting it, just thinking about this podcast, just reminded me of all it taught me. And right after that, we're going to talk to Paloma Garcia, who has luminance as one of her top values and has so much candor around what that feels like. So I'm looking forward to that. Then we're going to come to the 4 things you may not know about fame, but I think you should. You think fame is a simple thing. No, it's 1,000 times no, it's not a simple thing. For instance, some scholars think that fame is not about narcissism or affluence, which you might think it's about, but it's in a distinct category, and it's actually a death coping mechanism. Yeah. After which we'll talk to a person who's had a front row seat on fame as a value, a Hollywood casting director, the one, the only, Suzy Welch of Fox Studios, my daughter, who has spent every day of her career, past 14 years, in the same room with people who have luminance as a top value. They must, because they're trying to become famous. And finally, I hope to leave you in this podcast with some questions to ponder about your own relationship with being known, with being famous. I think you should try to answer them because I myself have been trying this week as I've been getting ready for this podcast and researching this podcast, which has ended up being so much more philosophical and convicting and eye-opening than I expected it to be. So I've been grappling with these questions myself. So once again, I'm Suzy Welch, and this is Becoming You. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get going.
I just want to tell you all how happy I am to be back in the studio, making a picture again. You don't know how much I've missed all of you. And I promise you I'll never desert you again. Because after Salome, we'll make another picture and another picture. You see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark. All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Okay, this has to be the most famous scene about fame in history, don't you think? I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille. And it's often actually taken out of context, to tell you the truth, to describe someone who is trying to get famous, right? Some people misunderstand what happens in this movie. But let's talk about what really happened in this incredible scene. So the line occurs at the very end of the movie Sunset Boulevard, which was released in 1950. It became like an instant classic. And it is spoken by Norma Desmond, who's a forgotten silent film star. She's not in her prime when she states it. Let's put it that way. She's a woman of past a certain age. And in fact, when she says that she's about to be locked away for life, you see, earlier in the film, spoiler alert, Norma has shot and killed her young screenwriter lover, a guy named Joe Gillis in the movie, after he tried to leave her. And in this final scene, her mansion is swarming with police officers and detectives and news reporters. And Norma has been locked in her upstairs bedroom. She's completely unaware of what's going on in the house, and she's unresponsive to the police in the house. And she has this working for her, this fiercely loyal butler and former director of hers becomes her butler, Max von Meyerling. And he ironically realizes that the flashing cameras and the police lights will be, like the news crews, will be used to coax her out downstairs so she can be arrested. And so Max tells Norma that the cameras are there for her big comeback movie, which they're telling her is Salome. And Norma believing that she's finally back on a movie set under the direction of her favorite director, Cecil B. DeMille, Norma becomes ecstatic. And she glides down the grand staircase, which is like swarming with reporters and cops. And she comes down in this like dramatic, hypnotic trance. And she addresses the crowd of reporters and police officers as if they're like her adoring fans and studio crew. She delivers a monologue first about her love for the camera. And then she looks directly into the camera, which is actually a newsreel camera. And she looks at it and she mistakes it for the cameraman for her director. And she utters the final line, "All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up." That's what she says. And then she steps directly towards the lens until her face kind of blurs out into this very chilling, distorted fade to black. It's like really an incredible piece of filmmaking. And it just signals her complete withdrawal into permanent madness, driven there by, we're led to believe in the movie, driven there by fame. And I think very sadly, that is how many people think about the desire for fame as a kind of madness, a kind of sickness, and why this value is so stigmatized. It really is. I mean, I think that's why Luminance is, drumroll please, the very last value for most people in the world. I mean, for Americans, it is. We have our data at the Becoming You Labs. I don't know, we're approaching 200,000 people having taken the values bridge in the last year. This actually gives us the largest, cleanest, newest data set about values in the world. And what comes in dead last when you aggregate all the data is Luminance. Now, if you're a regular listener, you recently heard me talk about the number one value overall for the population, which is eudaimonia. That's the value of well-being and pleasure and joy in the moment. 58% of the general population has that value in their top 5. Not me, by the way. For me, it's number 15 because I'm the least fun person in the world. But by contrast, Luminance is the number 16 dead last value, okay, for most people. Only 3% have it in their top 5 values. 3%. How about as a middling value, a moderate value, somewhere between 6 and 11 in the ranking? That's only 13%. But most people, 82%, have it in their bottom 5 values. Where do you think it is for you? Maybe you've already taken the values bridge, so you already know exactly where it is. But I think this is actually a value that we can pretty much self-report. You can make a reasonable guess at it. So where does it fall to you? And probably if you're like most people, the desire for fame is pretty low. Why is that? Well, we will get there in today's podcast for sure. But first, I want to tell you the sad story of me and my friend that I lost, the person who's not my friend anymore. And it's actually because of this value and my not understanding it as well as I do today. I honestly think that's part of it. And I hope you can understand it better today after listening to this podcast, so this kind of thing never happens to you. So when I was in college, maybe the very first month there, I met another freshman. We're going to call him Brad. That's not his name. Absolutely not his name. Okay. But let's call him Brad. From the minute I met Brad, I knew he was a super different person. He was actually he was quite a small person physically. He was very skinny and short, and he was not handsome in a traditional way, but he was magnetic. He was just larger than life. He was this ball of this huge kinetic, energy. You had to look at him. You had to listen to him. We didn't have the word for it then, but what he had was Riz, right? He had confidence, and he had these very amazing blue eyes, really intense blue eyes, and so much humor and so much insight. And he was so honest and direct, but also really self-deprecating. You just had to know him. You had to be in the room with him. And to be with him was like to be at a party at all times. Remember, we were like 19 years old, but he was super interesting. Now, part of Brad's confidence came from his brain, which was massive. He was just one of the smartest people I've ever known in my life. But he also was from kind of an American royal family. Like, his family's very, very well known. And he had a lot of famous relatives in the arts and in politics. These people were mainly all household names. Therefore, he was famous with all the other students on campus. And he was friends with all these other famous people on campus. Okay, so he was constantly being invited to glamorous parties on campus, and that I, being a very regular person, I didn't even know these kind of parties existed until he would be coming back from them in his tuxedo. And I was like, wow, there's another parallel world at Harvard that I'm not in. So despite his fanciness, he still was an incredible friend to me. He was really caring about the details of my life. And by sophomore year, he and I together were part of this little circle of 6 comrades. There were like 6 of us. We were like a total best friend group. And we basically did college together. Like he had this huge circle of friends and he knew everyone on campus. But we were the 6 people. We were absolute besties. And I actually have a photo of us sailing together one summer. We spent our summers together. And he's like wearing his glasses upside down to make fun of himself. And God, he was just so dear and he was so fascinating. And I never knew anybody like him. And he just had so much humanity and he was delightful. Anyway, I had no doubt in my life ever that Brad was going to be like wildly famous. I mean, he had famous person energy. He already acted like he was famous. And it was just a matter of how he would become famous because he could become famous any way he wanted as a writer or a politician, or you just didn't know what flavor of famous he was going to be. He was leaning towards going into politics, but he could have been a scholar and actually, he could have been the president of a university or the United States. I mean, he was just that way. But after we graduated, he had to go to England because he won a big award. And look, in those days, there was no email and no texting. And so when somebody went off to Europe, you could kind of lose touch with somebody. And I went to the Miami Herald at this point to be a reporter. It was 1981, no social media. I couldn't follow him on Instagram. But so actually, I want to say that right after we graduated, we lost touch for about 6 months. It went that way in those days. It was not bizarre to not talk to somebody for 6 months and not know the details of their daily life, like what they had for breakfast, the way we do now. But he was studying in England and everything was kind of going along. And then one day, out of the blue, I got an absolutely frantic, hysterical phone call from my college best friend, Nancy, who was also part of that 6 best friend person clique. And she was hysterical because Brad had called her on the phone and she said to me, I don't know what's going on with Brad. He said these very, very odd things and I thought he was joking. And she was totally confused. And I was like, well, maybe he's just pranking you. And she was like, he was definitely not pranking me. Something is really up. He was saying very bizarre things. And she repeated stuff he was saying, which was like really weird and mystical. And he was like on the other side and he was on the mountain. I'm just going to spare you the just terrible, protracted details of what happened and just tell you that what had ended up happening was he called her in the middle of a psychotic break. Mental illness has no conscience. It just picks its victims the way it wants to. And eventually he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and it was severe. And the way it unfolded was terrible because none of us understood what was happening. Why? It was utterly unimaginable that this thing could happen to this person. So he eventually got back to the United States. Another terrible incident happened involving the police. And I would say that one of the hardest memories of my life was he was institutionalized. The police found him. They didn't know who he was or how fancy he was. He was institutionalized. Eventually, his family got him into a great mental institution. I'll never forget going to see him the first time and coming around the corner and seeing him in a full straitjacket. And this person who you couldn't imagine anything but stardom that he would become a star, that he would become known by the world because of his amazingness was, utterly incapacitated by being hospitalized and in a straitjacket. It was inconceivable. Anyway, I felt a couple of things of shock, but I also felt completely determined to stay his friend and to stay by his side. I knew he would have done the same for me. He was a true and dear friend, and I thought, I don't care what happens to him and what this looks like the next, the future of our friendship. I'm going to abide him, and I'm going to stay true to him. Let us just fast forward 30 some years, and he and I were at a function together. And we were probably in our 50s at that point. His life had been very rough and very just completely defined by his mental illness. And of course, our friendship had to change because he was a different person. And at one point at this function, he said to me, I don't know what to do with my life. I want to do X, I want to do Y. Why don't we do that process together? And at this point, I had my show on CNBC, Suzy Welch Fix My Life, and I was beginning to form the Becoming You methodology. And so I agreed to meet with him later that week to do Becoming You with him. What was I thinking, dear listeners? I was thinking stupid thoughts. What a crazy ass thing for me to do. Okay, but we sat down in my living room to do Becoming You together. We got to one of the exercises that's meant to surface your values. The values bridge, of course, was not invented at this point. And I asked him what would make him cry at his 80th birthday from regret. And he said that my obituary was not on the front page of the New York Times. What he was saying is the most important thing to him when he died was that he would be so famous that his obituary would be on the front page of the New York Times. Because I had no empathy for values, and because I was being so clinical about it, and because I obviously just was not, I didn't have the right response. I wasn't the right friend to him in that moment. I don't know what came over me, but I literally said to him, well, that's not going to happen, Brad, let's be real. I mean, we'd always been rather truthful with each other. He was an incredibly truthful person, and his illness made him even more truthful, just took all the, all the softness off of him in many ways. And he said, how could you say that to me? You can't take my values away from me. What a true statement he made, and what a dope I was. And I said, I think in the moment I said, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to help you here. You have to let go of this dream. The fact is we don't let go of our values. Our values are formed in this cauldron of our upbringing. Now, we can have a huge authenticity gap. If he had had the values bridge, Luminance would have come out as his number one value, and he would have had a 100% gap, okay? And I could have talked to him about his gap and how you close it or how you deal with the fact that it's there. You have language for it. I've got a gigantic gap on my top value. That causes a lot of pain in my heart. That's the way it goes. And a lot of people who have Luminance as a top value have a gigantic gap because it's so damn hard to become famous. It is the value with the highest overall authenticity gap, right after it is radius, but Luminance because it's so hard to become famous. So he was a person who had Luminance at number one with 100% gap. And I basically said to him, just get over yourself. That's what I said. What an ass. Okay, fine. And he was so mad he left. And I don't think we spoke for 2 years after that. I think I tried to reach out to him, and my memory is he kind of dropped the phone on me, got off the call. And through that best friend, Nancy, who I mentioned earlier, I got word that he was really, felt I'd let him down as a friend. And you know what? I really had. Here's a person who had this value that's stigmatized in society. It's misunderstood in society. That's part of the points of this actual podcast is this is a value we need to have more compassion around, including those of us who don't have it. And I probably have it higher than you. For me, it's like number 6 or 7. Otherwise, I wouldn't be making this podcast. Obviously, I have some luminance in me. But I would say all of us need to have more compassion for this value. Why should some values be okay and others not? You're not hurting anybody if you want to be famous. He wasn't hurting anybody but himself, frankly. So this has stayed with me as I've done my research, and people, Luminance, as I've said, is the bottom value for most Americans, number 16. Look, time has passed since then. We've seen each other a couple of times. It's the relationship was broken by that. My bad. I have apologized to him. Of course I have, if that's what you're wondering. I love him very much, and my heart breaks for him and what he went through. All right, that's that sad story. I'm still learning from it, by the way. As we do from our mistakes. But let us move on. Let us move on and talk more about this incredible value of Luminance. All right. Well, I just talked about my friend Brad, who had Luminance as number one, but we are going to now talk to somebody who's living with Luminance right now, who's actually in a fabulous and different and introspective and just such an insightful place. Her name is Paloma Garcia-Lee. She's an actress and dancer. And, she's had some renown. She's been in 6 Broadway shows. Actually, I will say that when I told my daughter, who's a casting director in Hollywood, that I was going to be interviewing Paloma Garcia-Lee for this podcast, she said, I know exactly who she is. So she's well known in Hollywood, but she considers Luminance is definitely her number one value. And her story and her insight into what it is to have this as your driving value is so poignant and so eye-opening to me. And so I'm really looking forward to introducing you to Paloma Garcia-Lee. All right, Paloma, hi. How are you?
Hi, I'm so wonderful. I'm so excited to be talking with you today, truly.
I know, I am. I'm excited to. You're in LA, I'm sure.
I am a beautiful.
The ground zero for the value of Luminance, of fame. All right, so look, your story is such a fascinating one. I know, but I want you to share it with our listeners in your own words. So I'm just going to let you talk. Go ahead, Paloma.
Yeah. So I'm an artist. I was born into a family of artists. People always ask me how long I've been doing this. I say truly forever. My mom was a dancer and a Broadway dancer, and my dad was a scenic designer, lighting designer, musician, writer, like you name it, they've done it. And so I was born into art. I was in the womb while my mom was dancing. And even from a young age, I was put into dance when I was 2 or 3 years old. But before that, I was sitting in the corner of a studio, or my mom would wear me while she would take ballet class. So it's like, there's really like a cellular artist connection for me. Dance called to me first. acting alongside that. And when I was younger, I just remember the immense feeling of loving it, right? Because at that point, I'm not doing it for money. I'm not doing it for fame. I'm not doing it for anything other than I knew I wanted to be an artist. I used to like cut out pictures from every dance magazine and every backstage magazine, and I plastered them all over the walls of my room at home. And I would just lay in my bed. And I remember being so overwhelmed as young as like probably like 7 or 8 years old, like overwhelmed with the feeling of like, I want to do that one day, whatever that is. I want that feeling. I want to be on stage. I want to impact. I would love to be a picture on someone's wall one day that inspires them to do something. Like those feelings came in like the single digits and like young teens for me.
Yeah. You were laying in bed at night and you would think about being on a stage.
Truly. And I think at that point, it wasn't about like the being perceived part of it. It was something at that point about, again, like what I felt when I danced. And I always have felt like I have so much inside me, to express. And so it was sort of like that first outlet. The feeling was overwhelming. It's felt like dire. To be an artist feels dire to me, and it's always felt that way.
Right. This hunger, like I often describe the values as hungers. Like there was this hunger for you to dance, but to be seen dancing, I think, right?
Yeah, or to express whatever, I needed to express to anyone else. Impact is important to me. So it's less of everyone being like, you're amazing, you're famous, you're so good at this. It's more like I have witnessed and been impacted by art in such a way that has made me feel less alone. And then the hope is to do that for others. But I remember even feeling that like it was always storytelling. Like I wanted to tell this like painful artistic story so that hopefully like my friend would feel less alone. Like I would like dance my feelings for my friends when I was really young.
Yeah.
I went to boarding school. I was so hungry and eager. So I was at school for ballet and I fell in love with acting while I was there. And then acting became, again, it's not like, oh, I'd like to do that. I have to do that. I have to do that right now. And in their high school program, high school, obviously 4 years, they only have an acting program for the seniors in high school. And it's pretty much like a college prep program.
Right.
And so in 9th and 10th grade, I was like, now I want to be an actor and I want it more than anything. So after my 10th grade year, I actually went to a community college all summer to get all of my credits so that I could skip my junior year of high school to move into the acting department a year early because I was like, I cannot wait to do this.
Wow.
I have to do it now. So I did that. And then I graduated at 17 years old and I had auditioned for 2 colleges at this point. I auditioned for North Carolina School of the Arts and Juilliard. And I was like, it's this or nothing for me. And truth be told, I didn't get into either program. And then my dean at school told me, I really suggest that you go to New York. Like you are so hungry and you are so ready. Go take a gap year, see what happens for you.
I want to say that this is such the hallmark of having this as a high value. It's such a hallmark is that you could have at that moment when you didn't get into those 2 schools, you could have said, I guess it's not happening for me. And,
yeah.
There's very interesting research that shows that, that young children, 6th and 7th grade have this, have fame as a much higher value. And it diminishes as a value when they're told it's not going to happen for you. But what happened to you is very interesting. I mean, it shows why this is your number one value is that the 2 schools said, you're not coming here. And you were like, okay, I'm going to New York to go meet this, to fulfill this hunger.
Yes, and I think that's actually such an important point for me to touch on that even when I went to boarding school, I auditioned and I was waitlisted. Nothing in my career and nothing in my life has been given to me on first try. I have had to fight through so many no's. I mean, anyone in the arts knows that we're dealing with like 99% rejection all the time and the 1% yes that we get. Like we have to be so beautifully delusional to be in the arts because nothing is linear. But
right.
Ever since a young age, nothing was handed to me, and so when I am told no as a person, it fuels me. It somehow brings up something in me saying, "I'll prove to you I can. I promise you I will." And that that rev in me happened. So yeah, those 2 schools and the school I was at said, if in a year nothing happens for you, give us a call. Let's revisit this for you to re-audition next year. And I was just like, you'll see what I can do. And
just you wait, right? Just you wait, right?
And I moved to New York at 17 years old and I hit the ground running. I was doing, 5 auditions for Broadway shows a day. I would just show up. I would show up for auditions that I wasn't even right for and just beg the casting director to see me, to just give me a chance. And, I do feel like I was incredibly lucky. I made my Broadway debut at 17 years old in The Phantom of the Opera. And that was just a few months after school. I graduated in June, and in October, I was working in Phantom on Broadway.
So there you were, age 17, in Phantom of the Opera. Like the hunger was sated for a moment there. Like, what did it feel like?
It felt so I knew I could do this, like so affirming in that way. And so, I mean, in gratitude, beyond gratitude, I'll never forget. It happened very quickly. I auditioned and within the week I was in the show. And so it was a very fast process. And I just remember, there's this beautiful moment in the opening of Act 2 in the first number, and you turn around and you really get this moment to look out into the audience. And I just remember feeling the like sense of belonging, not nerves, not fear, not anything other than like I found home in that moment. And I'm incredibly lucky that for 14 years after that, I called the Broadway stage, and still to this day, call the Broadway stage home. And it really, though, after that first show, everyone's like, oh, you booked, and then you've made it, right? The concept of you've made it, you've achieved your dream starts happening when you start achieving those successes. But to me, I didn't come here to do one Broadway show. I came here to do 10 Broadway shows. I came here to squeeze this juice so big. So it's like after Phantom, and the thing about being a dancer and an actor, right, is there's no guarantee for anything ever again. You could do one Broadway show, then never work again. No one promises you.
Yeah, but you worked straight through for many years. What else were you in?
After Phantom, I did Nice Work If You Can Get It, and On the Town, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet, and Moulin Rouge. And I want to say in this too that the in-betweens though in there, I'm lucky to have not been unemployed for very long in between, but that's still, after you've done a Broadway show, you're back to the grind. You're back to 5 auditions a day. You're back to 0, and you have to do it all over again every time. And maybe, you get an agent at a certain point, or maybe you get moved into a smaller pool of people getting considered. But to this, I have 6 Broadway shows to my name now, and I have to go in to the first dance call, to round 1, to do it again and bet on myself again and get cut and cut and cut. And again, I tell, I mentor young artists now. It's something I'm really passionate about. And, they're like, wow, you've done 6 Broadway shows. And I'm like, how many do you think I've auditioned for? I've probably auditioned for 100 Broadway shows. I've always taken rejection fairly well, not to say that things don't hit me and impact me. Of course they do. I'm human. Every no fuels me to show up the next day better and brighter and work harder. And that's the thing about being an artist too, is like, you don't complete school with your skill set for forever. You dance class all the time, acting class, voice lessons, having to constantly better yourself, or you lose it. It's like, it's a muscle.
Was there ever a no where and you got a lot of no's, okay? Was there ever a no where you said, I'm out, I'm done, I can't do it anymore?
There's been some seasons of no's in terms of with some, there's just like sometimes the no's pile so high and it's just like seemingly endless no's. Yeah. And I know from statistics now, or I know that if you stay, the yes comes. And sometimes it's just, you feel like you are fighting to feel seen. You are fighting to feel worthy. You are fighting to feel like your art matters or your human has something to offer. I believe I'm put on this earth this lifetime to do this. And I'm all chips in on this, but there have definitely been moments where I've had to exhale, walk away, do a reset.
Yeah. Now my thought is this, I mean, you're dancing on Broadway, but it didn't obviously it didn't sate your fame. One of the things about the dancers on Broadway is they're pretty anonymous, right? It's like, you're working as an artist, but it doesn't mean you're famous. So there was a moment where you turned your attentions to acting. Talk to us about that.
In I think this would have been around 2019, I had just finished my first TV show that I worked on called Fosse Verdon on FX. And again, I was able to come in sort of as a dancer and then meet the team and transition into a role for that season, which was really my first taste of like a camera in my face, of feeling like, again, I'm able to embody a character. And of course I could do that in small ways on Broadway, but now I was like, oh, I'm this human on a TV show. Right. And they were auditioning soon after that for Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. And I remember when I saw, and I have a long sort of history with West Side Story, as does my mom. And I remember seeing the Deadline article go out that Steven Spielberg was going to be remaking that movie. And I wrote down in my journal, I'm playing Graziella in Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. And I remember just like feeling this like in my chest about it. And, thousands and thousands and thousands of people auditioned for that film. And I ended up booking Graziella in his West Side Story. And this was coinciding. This was the busiest. I had just wrapped this FX show. I was opening Moulin Rouge on Broadway, and I was like doing Moulin Rouge at night and filming with Spielberg during the day. And it was this huge moment of success in my life. And again, these are the moments that now I know as an artist, like you have to bottle that feeling and remember that on your dark days. And I remember there were moments that I was filming that movie that I was like the bar set again, when that, whatever that was to be on Broadway, whatever that was to achieve that, this new dream, this new North Star, like ignited in me in terms of what is possible. The scope is so much wider. I don't need to be in front of Broadway audiences. I could be in front of the world. And so the feeling is so much bigger than like, I just hope I'm famous so people know who I am. I'm just like, what I can do, the artist I can be, the art I can make, the impact I can have is global. And I just, it was an overwhelming feeling. I think people assume, I often say that doing that movie ruined my life. And I mean that in the way that like, I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't unfeel what I had felt. And now I knew there was like this feeling in me that was like,
it's like it redoubled your luminance. I mean, it just made you feel like, I mean, you said to me when we were talking before that Steven Spielberg made you realize, how much you made you believe you could be a star.
Yes.
And it reaffirmed and revalidated in you this desire to be a star.
Hugely. Well, and especially for a first, right? Like some people, you work your whole life to be in a Spielberg film. It's this incredible experience was gifted to me as that's my first film set I've ever been on. And so the bar is just like massive now in what I want, what I believe and know I'm capable of.
Right.
Because now I've done it. So now I'm like, now I need this on the biggest scale, the bigger scale, the bigger scale, the bigger scale. And I knew in that moment that everything in my life had to change. And I started asking myself, what am I willing to do? Like, I was in the ensemble of Moulin Rouge at the time still, and I would be on stage at night after filming or after we wrapped that movie, and I would be on stage and I no longer felt home. I felt like there was a disconnect from where I need to be and what I need to be focused on and what I'm doing.
You needed a bigger stage, right?
I knew everything had to change. And, I care to speak on this moment so vulnerably. I was achieving, personal life success in my 20s. I did all the things. I got married. I booked my Broadway show. I was, making good money. I checked all of these boxes that I had set for myself. And now there's a whole new set of boxes to go check.
Yeah.
And it's coincided with, COVID and the pandemic happening. And so I had these moments, I remember the day coming into work that all the theaters shut down. My job goes away. My identity goes away as an artist. Like I didn't get to work online. Just, we get told that who knows when Broadway's going to be back. But that moment was a real gift for me because in that silence, I had to ask myself, what am I willing to do to live my authentic life, to chase this dream, to, do what I need to do what I'm supposed to do, if that makes sense.
And what were you willing to do?
I left my job on Broadway. I got divorced. I packed up all of my things and I drove with my dad across the country and I started a complete new life. This was right turning 30 as well. Very Saturn return. I started an entire new life in Los Angeles in 2020 and in service of this new bar and dream that I have.
You were basically like, I'm leaving it. I'm putting all the bets. I'm putting all the chips on me.
Yes.
And my luminance.
Yes.
So what's happened in those 6 years?
So much and so little. And the truth is the best way to lead of, I came out being like, I'm in a Spielberg film. Everything's going to work out for me in this way. And I'm going to do this and do this and do this. I moved out to Los Angeles and, our movie came out at like the second peak wave of COVID and not everyone went to go see it. There was, so much turmoil. There's been so much duress in the film and TV industry. Fewer and fewer opportunities are being given to new artists and new voices. The middle class actor, the guest star, the chance takers. It's a really hard time for us right now.
Yeah.
And so all of these things, it's been a slew of no's, and not to say that there haven't been beautiful yeses over the last few years. I've been a part of a few really beautiful independent films. I've worked on really wonderful TV shows like Star Wars and Elsbeth and Skeleton Crew. These, what I believe to me to be gifts from the universe of droplets of proof that I'm on the path. And every time I get almost starved out, I'm given this little drop to be like, keep going. And so I've had to really ask myself, so in my 20s, right, I actually found fairly fast success on Broadway and fairly consistent success towards this dream. Now I'm being asked in a way that seems more difficult because I'm older. I have more to lose. I value stability in a way that I didn't when I was younger. It's not just like wobbity goobity throw things at the wall anymore. I'm building a life with myself. And so now the bet on myself, money is different the older you get, all of these things. And I have had to bet on myself. And to this day, to this moment, to things that happened this morning before this conversation, like I am betting on myself in the biggest way I ever have in my life. And I have less proof than I've ever had at this point in my life. And I really feel like, like some people talk about like a magic dark moment. And I really feel like I'm speaking to you from that moment right now, where I'm being asked to, like believe in myself and trust what I know I'm meant to do more than ever in service of this dream that I have.
You know, thank you. And thank you for your vulnerability. And for, I so hear you and feel you. It's like this moment, our values do this to us, and especially Luminance, because you're doing it publicly. Like, okay, maybe other values, there's a magic dark moment where you think I'm putting all my chips on achievement or belonging or whatever, but nobody sees you do that the way they see you do it when the value that you're putting the chips on is fame.
Yeah, it's so interesting, in thinking about this value point and thinking about fame and thinking about the vulnerability of saying that I want to be famous, that I want to be known, that I want people to know my name. And when I go, I want to leave something behind me. Yeah. And again, like those are those driving forces right now for me that, that keep the lights on for me.
Right. Emotionally. So. Yeah. Do you have a time frame for yourself, Paloma, where you're like, okay, if it doesn't happen for me by X date, it's over for me? Or what do you think?
I don't. I say that to my mentorship students a lot because some of them come to me being like, I've lived in New York for 10 years and it hasn't happened yet. What do I do? And I was like, well, if 10 years is the time you gave only we can know inside ourselves what that time limit is. For me, like, this is everything to me. It's been everything to me since I was little. And I think I'll spend every day of my life working towards it. And what it is, right? That, what fame is for me, has many different shapes. So now I'm writing a screenplay right now. And I workshopped a play with my writing partner that I wrote this year. And so I'm just like, there are all these different, for me, it's more of a puzzle of what's the in. There are endless ways to like do this and go about it. And so I'm just really exhausting being like, to be an artist is saying yes to me, is showing up for me. So whether that be acting, whether that be dance, whether that be writing, I will just continue to work every day and take the steps every day towards being known and making impact as an artist.
God, I hope you make it.
I hope so too.
I think, look, in a way, at 30,000 feet, this is my field, is values fulfillment. I hope everybody gets to live their values. I think I actually think there's a lot of pain involved in having a gap. We call it on the values bridge, the authenticity gap. And no matter the size of your gap is about the size of your, of the ache in your chest, not living. We want to live our values. You have a rare value. Like, you're in a city where almost everybody has your value. That LA is like, I would love someday to break out the demographics on Luminance by city, and we would find that LA's, data would be very different than, say, the data in Cleveland, Ohio on Luminance. But I think that, and so you're in a place where people can empathize with you. I mean, your story is just the story of this value, in that it is a value that we have no choice but to live publicly. Like, we can sort of keep our values to ourselves on almost, belonging, work centrism, they affect the people in our ecosystem. But when you have the top value of fame, of Luminance, you by definition live out your pursuit of this value in the public eye. And I think it makes you, you have to be tough. I mean, I think it's like, there's a question why not more people don't have this value. And, some people, I just don't want it. I don't want it. But I think some people can't take the scrutiny. I think it's a value that involves a huge amount of courage. I mean, when I hear your story, I think I wouldn't have the courage to do what you do. I think I tell the story at the beginning of this podcast about a fail of mine where I did not have enough empathy for a friend who had this as his top value. And I have so much empathy for it now. I think I just have more empathy for all values, but I learned a hard lesson that I should have had a tender heart towards his desire for it. It's no different than any value that I have or anyone else has. It's just you have to admit it to the world. And, and in that way, I think that we should all have a more tender heart towards it, because what you go through to achieve this value takes so much courage.
I think what's fascinating about especially artists, there is a sense of delusion that I believe we have to have within ourselves. When it hopes it happens, it will happen for me. And I wake up every day, it will happen for me. And not in I look in my mirror and I'm trying to convince myself of that. Like, I will achieve the things I'm here for, and I know that in my bones. And every day is such a worthy work towards it. And whether I try and spend very little time perceiving myself right now, because again, what is fame? I have been famous, according to some people. I have the young dancers come up to me all the time being like, if I die having had the career you've had, I'll die happy. So
wow.
to someone, to a huge audience, I've achieved the dream. And then to another audience, I am no one. I am nothing. And I have done nothing in this field. And so it's like how, I am very careful with how I perceive myself. And you're right. In a public eye, to my friends, I have friends who are A-list celebrities and who are friends who are just starting this journey, and I find myself falling in the middle of that,
Right.
And I'm just really careful to sort of keep my blinders on my dreams and goals. I really try to not compare myself to others.
I watched West Side Story when it came out, but now you're inspiring me to go watch it again and to keep my eyes peeled for you. Where can people find you on social media and other places if they want to learn more about you and know more about you?
I'm fairly active on Instagram. My handle is @PalomaGarcia-Lee. And from there, I have links. I have a website. I really try and stay up with my DMs. You can reach my mentorship program there if you're a young artist seeking any advice or any support or to have someone in your corner. It's so important to have that.
All right, we'll put it all in the show notes so that everybody can learn more about you and watch you. And next time you're in a Broadway show, I'm coming in, I'm sitting in the front row, and I'm going to shout out inappropriate things like, I know her.
Please do.
Well, thank you so much for talking about this unique and misunderstood value. I think you've put such an incredibly beautiful, human, vulnerable face on it. And for those people who sort of look at it and think, how could anybody ever have that value? Or I think that you've made me understand for sure the journey of living with this very human and deeply nuanced value. So I love knowing you and I love having you on. I'm so grateful to you.
Thank you so much. And I also want to say that for anyone that this is your value, to not judge yourself for wanting to be known, for wanting to be seen. And if you have that burn inside you, to share yourself in that way, to keep going and know that you're not alone. It's a beautiful value to have, and I hope you really embrace it.
I love that. Thanks. All right. I am so grateful to Paloma for her beautiful self-awareness and for her sharing of her vulnerability. But now let's get down to the brass tacks about Luminance with our 4 things about this value that may surprise you. I've kind of foreshadowed some of them, and I think some of them echo what we've just gone through. But let us go and just start. Number 1, we characterize Luminance as one thing. Okay, I've talked about it as one thing, but it has actually multiple varieties, and those varieties of Luminance really matter. One of the best things about making these deep dive podcasts about each value is that they force me to go back and review all the scholarship on each and every value, which I had to do for my PhD. But when you're writing a PhD, you're kind of like in a blind funk. I mean, scary. Okay. And so I'm really excited to go back to the FAME scholarship for this podcast today. I'm a scholar of values and there are scholars of fame, and I love reading what they have to say. And so here's where I landed. With regular people navigating the world, we basically think of people who want to be famous. You know what we think of them as? We think of them as narcissists, and we think they want to be known. They want to be known so that everyone will praise them and validate them. And it's so self-serving. They just want to be famous because they want everybody to love on them. But the truth is so much more subtle. Of course it is, because the researchers actually studied this, and there are more researchers in this space than you would think, and really great ones. They have found that the desire for fame isn't one desire. It's a family of desires, and they don't all look alike. So the best and most useful work here is from a professor named Dara Greenwood and her colleagues. And in 2013, they built something called the Fame Appeal Scale. We academics, we love a good rubric. We love a good framework. Anyway, Dr. Greenwood is professor of psychology at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, right up in Westchester-on-Hudson. And among this, she wrote a book called Fame and the Social Self. Dr. Greenwood and her colleagues, and there were a few of them, surveyed hundreds of young adults, and they asked them essentially, why do you want to be famous? And the answers clustered into distinct groups. The first was what you would expect. They want visibility and they want status. They want the red carpet. They want the recognition. They want the being looked at. They want the claps, the being known and the revere. Okay. So this is narcissism adjacent if it's unhealthy. And yes, it can be unhealthy, but it doesn't have to be. But it's only one strand of why people want to be famous. I mean, we assume it's the only strand, but it's not. There's a second strand, and it's called pro-social fame. That people who want to be famous do it in order to do good, to have a platform, to help, to be in a position to change something. I've actually heard Bono talk about the fact that the band formed so that they could do worldwide good. And, maybe it's virtue signaling, maybe it's not. But people want a big audience so they can say something worth hearing. I mean, one of my favorite stories around this, it involves Nicki Minaj. I love her. I love throwing up one of a slide of Nicki Minaj in my class at NYU Stern, and because students always think that I don't know who Nicki Minaj is. They visualize me at home, sort of knitting by the fire with one foot in the grave, but I know who she is, by the way. Anyway, I quote from her in a 2010 Rolling Stone interview where she says, I played the clip in class, when I first came to America, I would go into my room every single night and kneel down at the foot of my bed, and I would pray to God that he would make me rich and famous so I could take care of my mother. This is fame with a purpose of altruism. All right. So I think it's worth pointing out here that, she didn't pay just to be rich, but rich and famous. And her hunger for the spotlight was a hunger for something else. But fame was the root to it. OK, that was the delivery mechanism. And her prayer was about not her, but her mother. All right. So the third strand of fame is what Dr. Greenwood and her colleagues would call artistic or the intrinsic root. Fame as a byproduct of doing something really, really great. Later in this podcast, you're going to hear my daughter, who's a casting director in Hollywood, talk about how she has no problem with fame because the actors that she works with want to be famous because they love the craft of acting. And you can want to be famous because you're so good at soccer. Okay? Like, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to mention Erling Haaland, my boyfriend, who just, I don't think that guy set out to be famous. I think he set out to be really, really great at soccer. Does anybody notice he looks like he belongs as part of the Targaryens? Is that just me? Okay, not going to digress. Anyway, look, some people have both achievement and luminance, I think, but I think a lot of people just have achievement as a higher value, and they want to be so good that fame would be a byproduct of it, all right? And so that's a totally different form of fame. Not the red carpet, but to be the best at something in the world, so good at it, you would be famous. So finally, the research shows us that sometimes fame is the desire, okay, this is the fourth strand, that sometimes fame is a desire, forget this, for belonging, for not being forgotten, for belonging to the community of humanity. Dr. Greenwood found this strand correlated with loneliness and with insecure attachment. It's not, look at me, I'm superior. It's, please don't let me disappear. Please tell me I matter to a group. Please tell me I matter to you. That's the fourth strand. I think it's so human. Let's just put them all together. The bottom line is we usually think about fame wanting to be praised, but it can be, and it so often is, about other things. And I think we really need to embrace this nuance. I don't care why you have it. I'm not here to judge you. I think we just tell people they want to be famous. It's about vanity. And we think this person's vain and they're narcissistic, but maybe they want to be seen. Maybe they want to be great at something. Maybe they want to help their mother or build an orphanage. Okay. And I think we just judge so harshly about this value, and too harshly. I did it to Brad. I lived the consequences of that personally. I don't want you to. All right. That's my first point about fame. Let's go to the second thing that we don't know about fame, that maybe we should. And it's about death. And I didn't want to lump this in with all the other scholarship we just mentioned because I think it's very important to call it out, and it's very profound. And also, I should just note, it's not part of Dr. Greenwood's construct. There's actually a bunch of different scholars, I'm not going to list all of their names, who believe and conceptualize fame as a death coping mechanism. They're part of a school of thought called terror management theory. These are the same scholars who study why we watch horror movies. It started, I'll just name one, a cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker. He wrote in 1973, he published a book called The Denial of Death. He was dying of colon cancer when he wrote it, and he actually won the Pulitzer Prize for this book, unfortunately, after he died. And the argument of the book is that, this is an interesting argument, is that basically everything that human beings do and build, okay? Religion, art, nations, monuments, reputations, relationships. Everything that we do is an elaborate defense against the one fact we cannot metabolize, which is that we're animals and animals die. We're the only species of animals that knows that we're going to die. And Becker basically said you can actually understand all human behavior as a way of trying to cement their immortality. For this reason, and there's other scholars who have jumped in and sort of proved this and tested this and so forth. But if you look at the monuments of Rome, these were the leaders of Rome trying to leave a mark that they would be remembered long after they died. The pyramids are part of terror management theory. Religion, some scholars say that all of Christianity, because it promises people eternal life if they accept a certain belief system, is a terror management, part of the terror management theory. And so there's a school of thought of scholars who say the pursuit of seeing yourself on screen or being famous in any way, it's all about permanence. it's all about the inability to metabolize this core truth, which is that we are going to die. And that to some people, this knowledge is so genuinely intolerable, so unacceptable that we construct psychological defenses against it. We develop two psychological defenses. One is a cultural worldview, a story about the world in which you are a valuable participant in something meaningful and enduring, okay? And the other is self-esteem, the sense that you are measuring up inside of that story. And together they give you what they call symbolic immortality, the sense that some part of you outlasts the body. Okay, it could be your children, it could be an institution you built, it could be books, or it could be a name that keeps getting said. And so that is the second thing, that when you look at somebody who's got fame at a number one, as a number one value, there's one way of looking at them and thinking, they're just more in touch with the fact that they can't metabolize this one truth that we all face at the same time about our own mortality. All right. So look, I could talk to you about all the studies that they have done to measure this, but I just put it out there for you to ponder. It's pretty profound stuff. The whole point of this is that next time you want to hate on someone or feel negative on someone who wants to be famous, understand that they may be motivated by something that is really, really profound. And you know what? Underneath it all, you have it too. You've just found another way to cope with it. All right. Point number 3, fame is probably the only ironic value. There's 16 values. I think fame is the ironic value. And I'll tell you why. It so rarely does what we want it to do when we get it. Affluence, money may also be this way a little bit, but we get money and it doesn't buy us happiness, but sometimes it does. But fame is almost always guaranteed to be a value that when you finally get it and you close that authenticity gap, that it bites you in the rear end. There's a study about this. Of course, there's a study about this, but you don't even need a study about this because we all know a lot of stories like this. But it was conducted in 2009 by 2 people. The first was Donna Rockwell. She's a clinical psychologist at the Michigan School of Professional Psychology. And then the other was somebody named David Giles. He's a British media psychologist, and he's at the University of Winchester and the author of a book called Illusions of Immortality. So they interviewed a lot of famous people across all different disciplines. And what they found was, surprise, that fame produces, big surprise, loss of privacy. But also it actually causes something which means that entitization, which is a phenomenon where you feel like you're treated as a thing rather than a person. That actually happens to famous people. And then a phenomenon called character splitting, where you feel like you're 2 people, and mistrust and isolation and a kind of hedonistic treadmill that you cannot get off of, all right? Their paper basically found that being famous is something for which no one is ever prepared. And when it happens, instead of bringing you everything you want, it delivers mainly the emotions of detachment, a loneliness, distrust, and confusion. So people really, really want fame, and then they get it, and they describe it as a kind of trajectory where they first get it and they have kind of a total period of euphoria, and then it's sort of an addiction because you've got to stay on the treadmill to keep it, and then a phase of deep distrust and isolation. And finally, for those who have adapted, a kind of split personality, a public self and a private self. And I think it's kind of hard to feel sorry for people, because I remember one time seeing an actress like on the red carpet yelling at the paparazzi, "Get your cameras out of my face." And I remember thinking to myself, what did you think was going to happen when you went and auditioned for all those roles? What did you think? You think it was going to be that you weren't going to be famous? You asked to be famous. It's hard to feel sorry for celebrities who complain about their fame. And there's just a lot of books and movies and TV shows and memoirs about the awfulness of fame. All right. So this is no big surprise, but very few of the other values are this ironic. Okay. That, you get it and it doesn't give you what you want. Let's think about some of the other values. Belonging. This is the value of community and friendship. You get it and you feel, yay, I got it. Eudaimonia, well-being in the moment. You get it and you typically think, yay, I got it. All right. But luminance is a value that when you get it, you get, yay, I got it. Also, ow, it's really hard to keep it. So I think that we just got to, again, put that into our sympathy pile for people who have luminance. Because you know what? It's not like they're unaware that there's going to be a downside to getting it. It doesn't take this value out of them. All right, fourth and finally, I just want to say that fame is arguably the oldest human motivation that we have record of. But you know what? Fame is different now. Because actually in the olden days, if you became famous, it was usually because something you did. And, if you go back to the Greeks, our friends, the Greeks, they had this fame, and the word for fame and glory were the same. And fame was really just glory that outlived you. And it was the organizing motivation of the Iliad and this new movie, right? The Odyssey. And Achilles is often a literal choice, a long, comfortable, forgotten life or a short life filled with undying fame. And to everybody's applause, he chooses the short life with undying fame. And no one in the poem or around him or in history has said just, Achilles was a narcissist. They thought it was the heroic choice. And so like there's this book called The Frenzy of Renown, which is a history of fame. It charts what the whole sort of scholarly history of fame from Alexander the Great through Christian martyrdom, through modern celebrity, the whole apparatus around it. And the argument of the book is that the appetite for fame is constant across 3,000 years, that there's always been people who have wanted it. But what changes is the technology and distribution of fame, and crucially, what we think about it means what it means to a person. I mean, as I said, in the olden days, you went for fame and people were generally like, that's a cool thing. They're famous because they did something, all right? But now we have a lot of contempt for people who have fame. And where does it come from? In 2 words, reality TV probably, right? It's like in the past 20 years, 30 years, you could become famous for just the dopiest, stupidest things. I remember in the olden days when Sophia was casting a show that was called, it was going to be called I Love My Butt. And literally it was like people coming on screen and talking about why they love their butt. And then the B-roll, I mean, can you believe it? And the B-roll was like of people talking about their butt and doing things. Actually, when you think about it, it's kind of amazing the show didn't make it because, it has everything that reality TV is famous for. Anyway, I remember during that process, Sophia saying to me, what's terrifying, Mom? Some of these people will actually become famous for this show. So I think our feelings about fame, and the reason why we judge people who seek fame now is because you can become famous for some of the most ridiculous things in the world. And so maybe some of this sort of contempt towards fame is earned. There are people who just want to be famous for taking pictures of themselves. We all get it. So I want to say fame is a very old value. It's been around since the beginning. Our experience of it, our judgment towards it is what has changed. And so also put that in your head as you think about your own value of fame or whether or not you're living life and doing life with somebody who also has it as a top value. And all of this is probably why I think Luminance is the number 16 value for most people today, not because just 3% of people feel it. I actually bet that if you ask people when they're younger, the number is much, much higher. But, I think it's a very low value for Americans overall because it's the one value you're not allowed to admit to. I mean, every other value on the list, if you think about it, you can say out loud at a dinner party. You can say, I have high achievement, I have whatever. But try saying I want to be famous at a dinner party. I mean, unless you're in Hollywood, which is a city where everyone's allowed to have this, you can't. When you say it, it sort of makes people look at you askance. And that's why I have so much empathy now for people who own up to this value, like Paloma. I just love her so much for saying it's in me, it's driven me, it's so human, and it's a complex motivation. Let's wrap up with the conversation with Sophia, my daughter, who I've mentioned repeatedly. She's a casting director. She's been one for 14 years. She's seen it all. And we're gonna have a quick call with her because it's first thing in the morning in California. And so let's wake her up. Hi, Sophia.
Good morning.
I woke you up every morning of your life singing to you, didn't I?
Yes. Rise and shine and give God your glory.
Yep. That's right. Every morning.
Please don't do it right now.
I won't do it. By the way, everybody goes, rise and shine. Okay. All right. Listen, do you see actors wanting to be famous because they love the craft of acting? Am I capturing that correctly?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. It's luminance being their value is a byproduct of what they want to do with their lives.
Now, you've definitely met people who want to be famous who are talent free. That's somewhat frustrating, correct?
Yes, that's probably the thing that makes me uncomfortable. That would make me uncomfortable with the value of luminance is, if it's your value and you don't have a skill that would get you there. Right.
That's when it's very awkward. All right. You've said many profound things. All right. I want to just say that. But I think one of the most profound things you've ever said is when I asked you, what's the difference between the actors and actresses who make it and with this value and the ones who don't? And you had a very clear answer. What was that answer?
That they don't have a plan B.
That's right.
They don't have a backup plan. There's a sort of self-belief that they have that is, you could argue it's bordering on delusional.
You know what? I have to interrupt you, Sophia, because Paloma actually used the word delusional when she was describing herself. She said you have to have kind of a delusional belief. I think that this is an incredible concept on which to end the podcast, because how do you know you have this value, or what is the thing we need to understand about this value, or what is the defining hallmark of this value? It's like all values in a way. You can't talk someone out of it. There is no plan B for this value. And that when you really have a value as a defining top value, and I don't care if it's eudaimonia, I don't care if it's belonging, I don't care if it's cosmos, okay? You couldn't talk me out of my top values either. And I think with fame, what we've got to understand is there's no reasoning people out of it. If you've got it as a top value, there is no plan B.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right, Sophia, talk to you soon.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye. All right, we're going to wrap up now. And I promised you that I would end with some questions that you might ask yourself about Luminance. By the way, take the Values Bridge so you know where Luminance stands for you at thevaluesbridge.com. My question for you is where you would put Luminance on your list of 16, or where does it show up for you? And what's your authenticity gap? Your answer there is really worth sitting with. I also want you to think, well, what do you want to have outlast you in your life? Everybody has an answer for this. Everyone. It's like my children, my work, my reputation, this impact, that impact. And to be really honest about that with yourself, it's very profound. And finally, I think a good question to ask is if there's someone in your life right now, a friend, like I had, a spouse who wants to be famous. And what have you been saying to that person about their luminance value? Have you been hating on it? Have you been snarky? Have you been trying to talk them out of it? Or have you had a heart for that value? I ask you to ponder about yourself, how you have processed and metabolized that as one of their top values. All right, let's leave it there. Some questions for you to ponder. I am amazed how deep each value is. Thank you for coming on this journey with me this week and talking about this value, which you yourself may not have. But I think it's just so important for us not just to understand our own values, but to understand the values of all the 16 values of the people around us. That's how we build the bridges. That's how we build the bridges. That's how we have conversation. That's how we do life together. If you have thoughts about this podcast or any of our podcasts, and if you like this podcast, please, I'm begging you, okay, leave a review, subscribe to this podcast, and tell a friend about it. All right, do all those 3 things right now. Once again, I'm Suzy Welch. I'm so glad you've been here. I will see you next week on Becoming You.